we were in the very first focus group, and these women were talking about the little habits that if a husband does them, that it helped them feel loved and cared for and attended to, like these little things. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is that as these women were like, oh, and then this matters, and these little tiny things. And Jeff had recruited another man to be in the focus group to listen to, and the whole time they're looking at each other like, seriously, that matters? And Jeff was like, wow, it's not just Shaunti, it's not
Yeah.
just my wife.
Wow.
And so we identified the top 5
Okay.
for women,
All the men,
because
get out your notebooks and pens.
Hi, you're listening to Java with Jen with your host, Jenilee Samuel. On this show, I bring the simplicity of hearing God's voice into everyday life in a no-nonsense, authentic, and super practical way. With coffee in hand and real life in our faces, let's do this.
Hey everybody, thanks so much for joining me for another episode at Java with Jen. I have with me Shaunti Feldhahn again, which she was with us last week, and we were covering For Women Only, a book that she wrote, a series actually, like a pairing of books that she and her husband worked on years ago. They've sold over 3 million copies of these books, and today we're going to talk through the partner book, which is for men only, because, we couldn't let it only be a one-sided conversation. So that's what we're talking about today. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, Shaunti received her graduate degree from Harvard. She was an analyst on Wall Street before unexpectedly becoming a social researcher, a best-selling author, and a popular speaker. Today, she applies her analytical skills to investigating eye-opening, life-changing truths about relationships, both at home and in the workplace. Her groundbreaking research-based books, such as For Women Only and For Men Only, have sold more than 3 million copies in 25 languages. Shaunti, often with her husband, Jeff, speak at events each year around the world. Her research and commentary are featured in media outlets such as The Today Show, Focus on the Family, New York Times, and Family Life. Well, I'm so glad to have you here. Now, we talked about in the last episode that I decided to ask you to come on because I was having some challenges with being a house full of males, 4 boys and my husband, and I was like, surely there's things I should be doing differently. And so I got your book in hopes it would help me just understand the male population in my close proximity. And then you were so kind to suggest that we visit the other book, the one that's For Men Only, talking about women. And so I thought that was a great idea. So in honor of Valentine's Day, here we are. For anyone who didn't listen to the previous episode, you're going to want to make sure to put that on your next up so you can listen to that episode as well. But why don't you let us know what put this specifically on your radar? Why did you want to dive into these topics? And did you start with For Women Only or For Men Only? Which one did you start with?
I started with For Women Only. And the funny part about this, I can't remember if I told the story in the last podcast, to be
That's
honest
okay.
with you. But I'll give you the short version again because it cracked me up. Because our background is not what people think of when
Uh-huh.
you think of someone who's writing books on relationships,
Mhm.
because normally that's a therapist, right?
Yeah.
Like, or a pastor or pastor's wife. And instead, I was an analyst on Wall Street, but I had this opportunity to write a couple of novels. And one of the main characters in my novel was a man, and I didn't know how to put thoughts in his head. And
Ah,
look, you're writing a story with a main character. You have to say what they're thinking,
yeah.
not just what they're doing, right? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know what a guy would be thinking.
Uh-huh.
And so I started asking men, here's the scene. What would you be thinking in the situation? And I was like, what? Like when they started telling me what they were thinking, it was so surprising. And
Wow.
eventually I realized wasn't just that it was surprising, it was like really important. Like
Uh,
these were these foundational things that these men were describing, that they thought, that they felt, that impacted everything in their life. And I'm like, why
yeah.
didn't I know this? So that's when the analyst hat went on, right?
Wow.
And long story, but God made this amazing way for us to be able to do this big nationally representative survey of men.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became For Women Only, the other book.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, it's like, hello, like if we if we did the book about men, guess what we have to do next? That would not be right to just do one side. And so I was fascinated when Jeff and I, my husband and I, did the research for the companion book for men only,
Oh,
which of course is about women. And the same thing, the big nationally representative surveys, all the same type of really robust research behind it.
uh-huh.
I was really surprised that when I was doing the research as a woman, I was learning things that I didn't know about myself.
Wow.
Like, I would be listening in a focus group and some of the women would be unpacking, well, I don't know why I think that, but maybe it's this. And I'd be like, oh my word, that's exactly how I think. I wouldn't have been able to articulate it.
Wow.
And that could have just been me, right? So that's the reason that we do the big surveys, is to
Right.
find out, like, what percentage of people does this apply to? Because we need to say right up front, we're talking about women. Last time we talked about men, but we're not a monolith, right? Everybody's an individual. And
Right.
so the key is, okay, talk about this with your spouse and see, are they in the 87% or whatever? They may be in the 13%.
Yeah, and I feel like by making sure that you did the companion book that covers how women think, you're doing a service to mankind because I feel like, that whole stereotype that women are so complicated and men are like, I never understand how she thinks or whatever. So did you find that it felt like one gender was more complicated than the
No,
other?
no, this whole, the entire book, the whole thing, the whole project it started out honestly as a project for Jeff to see that women can be understood.
Oh.
Because the joke at the beginning, he
Uh-huh.
didn't want to do this. He was really reluctant.
Hmm.
And finally, I was like, okay, like, can we just sit down and talk about why you're so reluctant to do this project?
Uh-huh.
And he's like, well, this is to help men understand women, and I'm not sure you can be understood.
Oh,
Like,
bless.
dude. So this honestly, I'm like, okay, well, let's just start the focus groups. Let's, start investigating what some of the hypotheses would be that, men don't understand about women, but if we can be understood. And pretty soon Jeff was like, son of a gun. Like, I had
Wow.
no idea
Did it
that,
help? Did it help him understand you better?
oh, for sure. Like,
Wow.
there were so many things that we'd be sitting there in a focus group of some kind or another. I can still remember the very first one. Jeff, when we do marriage conferences, Jeff sometimes tells this story on stage, but we were in the very first focus group, and these women were talking about they were talking about the little habits that if a husband does them, that it helped them feel loved and cared for and attended to, like these little things.
Hmm.
And we can talk about that if you would like. But
Yeah.
the bottom line is that as these women are like, oh, and then this matters, and these little tiny things. And Jeff had recruited another man to be in the focus group to listen to, and the whole time they're looking at each other like, seriously? That matters? And Jeff was like, wow, it's not just Shaunti, it's not
Yeah.
just my wife, which is
Wow.
the benefit of putting some numbers and being able to show the men, like 80% of men think this way. It may, excuse me, 80% of women think this way. It may be worth talking to
Right.
your wife about whether she's in the 80%. So,
Yeah, that's so good. Well, and I watched a whole super long episode interview on Diary of a CEO last night where he was talking with the woman who wrote the book Cues, and she's a researcher and she studies like the subtle nuances of people's behavior and what makes people, likable or not likable and more impactful, more warm, more competent, whatever. And so I just think it's interesting because the messaging of her research was if you learn certain little habits, you can
yeah,
become more influential with people. And essentially, that's the same thing that you're
for sure.
saying, which is
Yeah.
so helpful.
It's actually this is not the topic that we're talking about today, but just so you know, that's actually what she is talking about. What
Uh-huh,
you were that author that you're talking about,
uh-huh,
what she was doing was essentially the reason why, after writing for women only about men
uh-huh,
and seeing how much it impacted my home life and learning these things like, whoa, about Jeff. And here I am. I had just come from Wall Street, which was an incredibly male dominated field.
Yes,
Like I
yes.
was usually the only woman in the room. And now in publishing and some of these other things, there's still some of that. And I started like applying some of these things in workplace
Mhm.
and ministry, and eye-opening. And so I did a big study on men in the workplace.
Wow.
And that's the reason, because it turns out there are some of these little things, just like that author was saying, that when you do them, it's sending a signal
Yeah,
to the man that you're working with,
yeah.
whether it's in ministry or volunteer or the office or whatever.
Wow.
So anyway, just so you know that's not the topic of our
No,
podcast.
that's so good though. Well, and
Yeah.
now I want to know what that book is called. Did you turn it into a book?
Yeah, it's called The Male Factor.
The Male Factor. Okay, now you guys have a list of books you need to get from Shaunti. Well, and I love it because I know how the men in my life are. Like my husband sometimes he'll be like, "Don't ask me to solve the problem, like figure out what you're thinking. Just tell me exactly what to do." He's
Just
like,
tell me what to do.
"Just give
Yep.
me a checklist, and I will be good, and I will do the thing." And so they just feel so much more confident when you tell them exactly what to do, and so
Yes.
that makes this so valuable for the men. I love it.
Exactly.
Okay. Okay, first question. You say that men understand that women need to feel loved, but there is something critical that men don't understand about what that means in practice. Can you explain that?
Yeah. So the key for men to understand, and by the way, if it's women listening to this, which,
Uh-huh.
may be the case, help your husband understand this, right?
Yes.
The key that men don't get, because like you said, every guy knows my wife needs to feel loved.
Mhm.
What they don't realize is how easy it is for her to not feel loved.
True.
Okay? So that's the key pivot point. Here's the here's the big thing that happens in a man's mind when they get married versus what happens in a woman's mind.
Okay.
And this is the reason for this. Okay. And let me explain. We talked about this a little bit, I think, last time, but let me just reiterate. It turns out that statistically, men and women tend to have two different sets of primary insecurities
Uh-huh.
running under the surface. The women's insecurity is kind of, you can basically label it as, am I lovable?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The men's is basically, am I able? That's what they have self-doubt about. For women, statistically, it's about 82% of women, depending on the survey. But for women, the question in our heart is, am I special? Am I lovable? Am I worthy of being loved for who I am? And so what we don't realize is that when we get married, men stop questioning whether their wife loves them. Like that's done. On to the next thing. That never comes up in their mind ever again, unless
Wow.
there's some like huge issues in the marriage or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah.
But that is a settled question, done. And it's this huge surprise for men to find out that no, it's not done in a woman's mind just because you get married and said your vows. And the reason is
Huh.
because of that internal question. That doesn't go away just because you're in a good marriage, for
Right.
example. It just morphs in marriage to, okay, does he really love me?
Mm.
Like, is he happy he married me? Like, would he
Yeah.
choose me all over again?
Yeah.
Those kind of versions of that question. And it's an enormous surprise to find out for men that that question is there every day just because of our nature and living in a sinful world. And that's our question. It's basically what God pronounced was the curse, right? Like,
Yeah.
your desire is going to be for your husband. And it's kind of the wording there is basically like a questioning kind of desire,
Mm-hmm.
an insecure kind of desire. And so because that's in there, men do need to know she has that question every day. So guess what?
Mm.
Under the
It's
surface, she's kind of looking for the answer to that question every day.
mm.
And so there are a host of things that will trigger that insecurity. Like think of it like a raw nerve a little bit.
Yeah.
and that will trigger that question, trigger that insecurity. And so for men to recognize what that looks like,
Mm-hmm.
and for them to be able to go, oh, this isn't like some random weird, I can't ever understand this behavior. Like, why did that happen? No, this is actually something predictable and systematizable. And there's something you can do about
Yeah.
both preventing and addressing it.
That's so good. So does this show up in her like her children relationships and in her friendships as well?
Are you talking about relationships with her children?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
So, yeah, a little bit with friendships for sure, because it's definitely the am I lovable just in a different way. It's kind of the reason everybody reverts when something goes wrong with a friendship. We all kind of revert back to internally that middle school self, like that felt rejected by the mean girls or whatever,
Yeah.
because that's the reason that's so painful when people are talking about you behind your back or whatever in middle school. It's because it's triggering the am I lovable question. And it's
Mm.
the reason that guys really don't care. Like
Wow.
if
That
in middle
makes
school, if someone
sense.
is talking about them behind their back, they're like, yeah, whatever. I'll just go over and hang out with Fred over here.
Yeah.
But it's because that's not their question, right?
Mm.
Their question is, am I able? So if Fred laughs when they drop the pass in football, oh, yeah, that's the equivalent of the mean girls talking behind your back.
Interesting.
So that's the issue. And what men don't realize and makes an enormous difference when they do is, oh, okay, like literally, I'm hitting this raw nerve. I have no intention of doing that.
Wow.
I want to show my wife how much I love her. It just doesn't work the same way I thought it did. So that was the reason for the research. So we could show the
Wow.
men how it does work.
That's incredible. Okay, so if they think of it, so that kind of leads into the fact that men, if they think that that problem or that question, though they don't realize that's the question, if they think that all things are settled when we got
Yeah,
married,
yeah,
then that makes sense why they think women are complicated because we're always on a search for, do you still
correct.
love me? And he's like, why am I having to answer this question every day? Settle the case, woman. And so, what did you find out that
Correct.
helps them understand women's process, or rather, what did you find out that helps men understand how women process their thoughts and emotions? Like, how did you help them resolve that?
So, okay, so here is one. I need to explain something about the processing in order to answer that question. So,
Okay.
because there is another reason that men find women complicated, and it is related to the differences in the brain wiring
Mm,
between men and women.
yeah.
So, this, and by the way, what I'm going to tell you is way oversimplifying the situation,
Okay.
but this is actually relatively accurate. I had a long interview with this eminent neuroscientist whose brain was so big, and every time he talked and opened his mouth and tried to explain something, I'm like, trying really hard to grasp what he's saying. And so I said, I think I'm hearing you say this, and I was simplifying it because
Hmm.
I told him I need to be able to write this in a book that people can understand. And he's
Yeah.
like, oh, no, 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 that's way too simple. Here's what it is. And I said, okay. And I went back to my simplistic. And finally, he was like, you know what? You're right. The way that you said it is actually a good, simple way of saying it. So here is essentially what men don't realize
Hmm.
about how we process and how they process, honestly.
Hmm.
Think of the male brain and the male desktop, the male brain as a computer desktop.
Okay.
Okay. And think of it as a computer that has one window open at a time. Okay. And one thought, one emotion. You live with a bunch of men, Jen, you get this.
Yeah.
One thought, one emotion, one function that they're working on in the brain at a
Yeah.
time. Now, this is obviously super simplified. This isn't actually the way the male brain works, but it's close. Okay. This is a pretty good representation. And so they work on that thought, or they are dealing with a worry or whatever it is, and they're done with it. So think of it again like a computer. You click the X on the window,
Mhm.
it goes away, you open the next thought. Okay. So that's kind of what the male brain is like. That's kind of the way that their processing works in some ways. The female brain is a computer
Meanwhile,
desktop with 10 windows open all at once.
I have like 25.
Yes, 20. I kind of do too. Okay. We always say 10 because it's simpler, but I actually think it's way understating it. And you think of all the things that we as women, and every woman listening to this is nodding, because we're bouncing back and forth between all the different thoughts and all the different feelings, and they're all interwoven, and one leads to the next. And then whenever Jeff and I do a marriage conference and he says this, he gets in trouble, but it's a great way of putting it. Jeff always goes, and it's not just that you have 10 windows open. He said, it's kind of like your system is infected with a virus.
Oh, rude.
Yeah. And of course, all the guys find that hilarious.
Yeah.
But it is actually true, because the way that we put it is, imagine now that you have your 10 windows or 25 windows up and you're bouncing back and forth, and then another one pops up that you don't want there.
Oh,
Like it's
yeah.
a worry, it's something that's going on. And so you want to click the X and make it go away. You don't want to be dealing with that. And you do, and it pops right back up.
Uh-huh.
And you click the X and it goes away, and then it pops right back up, and you can't get rid of it. And that is, I think the number was, I want to say it was like 85%. I can't remember the exact number, but it was incredibly high.
Uh-huh.
That is what the female brain is like, that men don't recognize. They can click the X and make a worry go away.
Yeah. Wow.
We can't, which is, at least most women can't. Some can, but most of us can't. And so what that means in practice for the average marriage is that men are going, why, like, okay, your boss embarrassed you in front of the group. It was Friday. And you're leaving for the weekend, knowing that on Monday morning, there's going to be a reckoning of some kind. Like you're going to walk in and all these people now think you're incompetent. What do you do? Like now your brain is going with all this stuff, and you've got, your kid has a piano recital, or you've got volunteer work at church. You don't want to be thinking about this, but you can't help it, right? Like it comes back up. And so you mention it to your husband. You mention it to him again, it comes up again, and unbeknownst to you, your husband is thinking, why can't she just let this go? You can't do anything about it until Monday.
Yeah.
Like, just don't think about it. And so they offer this very impressive advice.
Right.
Just don't think about it.
Oh, yeah, because that's so helpful.
So helpful, because they're basically saying, do what I do, click the X, make it go away. And they don't realize their wife doesn't have that brain wiring.
Yeah.
And so that's an example of when you talk about like the processing stuff, how different we are. But let me apply that to answering your main question, which is, how does that apply to a woman feeling loved or not loved? The biggest window in any woman's life, usually statistically, is the relationship with the husband.
Makes sense.
And so if there is a concern, if he's quiet, if you've had an argument and it hasn't been able to be resolved, and this is one of the ways we put it, is if you have an argument over breakfast and one of you drives away for work, or both of you drive away for work, the man, as he's driving away, the idea of that argument, let's say it's just a big emotional thing that's not resolved, it goes away. He clicks the X, he's in work mode, he doesn't think about it. For us as women, no. It's popping up all day long, right?
Yeah.
Like on and off. And it's basically, we tell the men, the feeling that women have is this unsettled sense of, are we okay? That's the feeling. Are we okay?
Yeah.
And that feeling is going to circle. That question is going to circle until you have a chance to address it and be reassured.
Yeah.
Whereas for men, it was just an argument. I was at work all day. I'm not thinking about it anymore. What's for dinner?
Yeah.
for women, it's like, no, like I need to be reassured that we are okay. And
Yeah.
so I don't have this constant, the equivalent of am I lovable
Yeah.
thing popping up.
That makes sense. And that's why it's so irritating to us women when there's an argument before bed and he literally rolls over to go to sleep and you're like, can't sleep because it's stewing all night long. So, okay, so
Wait,
tell me if I'm correct. I'm thinking the only way to be able to click that X to make the window go away is to make her feel better about
yes.
the situation.
Yes, the way that we actually did this study this on the nationally representative survey, we couldn't, we could only ask like 30 questions or something. I can't remember the number. But this was one of the 30 because it was so crucial. And I
Uh-huh.
think the number was 95% of women. You never get numbers that high, but it was pretty close to 100 that said, if he will reassure me before he leaves or before he goes to sleep or
Mhm.
whatever, it doesn't have to be a big, long conversation, but even something like, look, I'm angry. I'm not thinking anymore. It's 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, can we pick this up in the morning? But listen, I want you to know we're okay.
Mhm. Yeah.
Like, ooh, that changes everything. Now that is an item that every man needs to add to his toolbox.
Yeah.
Every man needs to add that to his checklist of just guys are like, just tell me what to do about it. Okay,
Yes.
there you go. This is one of the
Yes.
things just to do about it. Add
Yes.
that into your toolbox before you leave, before you go to sleep. Always reassure her.
Yes. And that I think leads into just the concept that men understand that security is important for a woman, but they don't always understand what that looks like played
Yes,
out, right? They think
yes,
security, or at least from what I would think that men think, is that security means there's a roof over her head, the bills are paid, I have a job. I feel like their brains usually go to financial security
yeah.
because they're wired to provide. So they're thinking in terms of that lens. Whereas for me, my priority is emotional security. Financial matters, but emotional comes first. Is that fair?
You are like most women and
Okay.
most men. If there are men listening to this podcast, they do not believe a word you just said.
Oh, really?
Yes, this is one of the topics that we find that men have the hardest time believing could
Huh.
possibly be true. And so, what we found, and I'll just tell you what we found in the numbers. And forgive me, I'm such a data nerd, so I
It's
always
okay.
have to go back to what we found in the numbers. But we paid a lot of money for these
Yeah.
surveys. So, anyway, what we've seen in both in the original survey of women and in some of the specialized surveys of women that we've done since, including one just on the money topic, what we found essentially is that 70% of married women, now this is specific to married women, okay, it's a little bit different for women as a whole, but 70% of married women, if they are forced to make a choice, which nobody would want to have to make this choice, by the way, this
Mhm.
is a false choice. But if you're forced to make a choice, 70% of these married women said, I will choose to give up financial security if I have to.
Mhm.
I will I will endure financial hardship. Just do not make me endure a lack of security in the relationship and an
Mhm.
insecurity in my relationship with him.
Yeah.
And so basically, when again, forced into a choice, it's 70-30. 30% of women are like, yeah, I'd rather endure the relationship hardship than endure financial hardship. But
Yeah.
70% said, no, I will endure anything financially. And the way one woman actually put it, which I love this comment, she basically said, look, if I'm at odds, or she basically said, if I have a good relationship with my husband,
Mhm.
I can get through anything financially.
Yeah.
But if we have all the money in the world, but not a good relationship, all that money doesn't mean very much.
Yeah.
And the reason men don't believe that, they don't believe that A, that women would make that choice, but B, they also say, okay, let me say that I believe your data. Yeah, she says that now, but let her endure that financial hardship and see what she says.
Uh-huh.
And what we found statistically with the women is the women who were more likely to say that were the ones who were enduring financial hardship.
Oh, wow.
The
Wow.
more financially difficult things were in the marriage, the more likely the woman was to say that.
Wow.
And that, like the woman I just quoted, for example, they were actually approaching bankruptcy, and they did end up going through bankruptcy.
Wow.
But she was like, I can get through this because we've got a strong relationship.
Right.
So what we tell men and what we tell women to tell men is essentially, what are the things that build that sense of security?
Mm-hmm.
And so, do you mind me jumping into that briefly?
Well, no, that's fine. But first, I want to hit, like, I feel like what you just described makes me think of, and I don't know if I learned this from your book or from another book, but
Okay.
I read somewhere that that's the way men feel about sex. Like, if the sexual
Yeah.
relationship is intact, they can handle any challenges at work. They can
Yes.
handle any financial hardship as long as that is stable. They're like, I can tackle these things. I can take the world. But if the sexual
Yeah.
relationship is struggling, all those challenges feel even heavier.
I think it was 77% of men said that.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
to me, I feel like that would make a crossover for the men to maybe understand that a little bit more.
Yeah, exactly. So if and it's not for 100% of men, but if that is for 77% of men, what's the equivalent for women if it's not sexual intimacy, which it is for some women, but if that's if that's not the thing that builds a sense of security for them, what is it? And what we found is that it's little simple actions done regularly. I'll give you some of the ones that the vast majority of women said were part of their little package of things that really mattered. One is things like taking their hand when you're walking across a parking lot.
Yeah.
That, because men think that these things are the big candlelight dinners, right? Like they think it's the big stuff that feels hard for them to arrange.
Yeah.
And we're like, no, it's a message that you're sending. And you
Wow.
can send the message in hundreds of ways. So things like taking her hand, or you're driving and you reach across and like you put your hand on her knee, like those kinds of gestures matter a lot. If you are sitting together at church, you put your arm around her at church, or you're at a restaurant, you put your arm around her as you're sitting there in the booth talking to your friends that you're having dinner with. It's a little thing, but it kind of says, you're mine. I love you so much, right? Like that message is really powerful with that
Yeah.
little tiny thing. Or sending her like a text message in the middle of the day that says something simple like, man, this has been a really hard day. I can't wait to see you tonight. I love you so much. Thank you for marrying me. Like she will screenshot that text message
And send it to her friends.
and send it to her friends. The thing is, and I could go on and on and on, but these little things, and what we always say is ask your wife what says those things and then put them in your toolbox. Because what happens is if you do these things regularly, what we found that happens, which is just beautiful, is it puts such a sense of security underneath her that, let's just say now that you do have the argument late at night and there is emotion and he rolls over and goes to sleep and he hasn't said, listen, we'll pick it up in the morning, we're okay.
Yeah.
She has such a sense of security that she is able to tell herself, you know what, this is just an argument. I know he loves me. I can go to sleep
Yeah.
and be fine.
Yeah.
And that is the ultimate goal for every husband. If you're going to love your wife like Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, it doesn't mean what guys think it means. It doesn't mean working 80-hour weeks at a job and breaking your back on the construction site in order to provide for her. Although providing is important, of course it is.
Yeah.
That's another biblical command. But it doesn't mean those things as much as it does learn what it is that speaks love to her
Yeah.
and do those little things every day and build that sense of security. That's what giving yourself up for her, because it doesn't come naturally to you. That's what it means.
Yeah, that makes sense. So I'm thinking through what I've seen my husband do in our relationship. Times when things were really rough. So like he didn't come in equipped with most of any of the tools for doing the little things, like his just the culture he grew up in and whatever. He had no grid. He told me early in our marriage. I asked him, why aren't you more of a gentleman? Like, why don't you open the door for me? Why don't you do little things like this? And he was like, chivalry is a Western ideology, it's ridiculous. And I was like, oh great, this is going to be fun. And so that was the mindset he came in with. And I noticed that when those little things weren't happening, and our marriage was in really rough spots, and I was like, I'm ready to peace out. Like, this marriage is destroying my mental health. And I was like, at this like extreme end, we came to that a few times. I noticed that he always would come in with grand sweeping gestures, like throw a big party and like do all these things. But the
Yeah.
truth was, because the little things weren't there, I didn't trust the big gestures,
Yeah.
because I was like, if you can't do the little things, then these big gestures are just a desperate attempt to rescue something, but that's not a character change. That's just a momentary, deep reach. And so would you say that that's how women feel, is if the little things aren't there, the big things don't hit the same?
Yeah, the way you described it is exactly what we found in the research. And this is where men think you're not being consistent. You have this random expectation. You're hard to like predict. Like, no, actually, it's just you're not recognizing
Mhm.
what's underneath that. And it is because if you don't do those little things every day, like, and one of the other ones I should have mentioned is listening.
Oh yeah,
That's
that's a
one of
big
the
one.
other little ones. That's a big deal. Even if it's just a little bit, like even if
Mhm.
it's just 15 minutes here and there talking about the day or whatever, if you don't have that, she does not have that sense of security. That sense of, am I lovable? Does he really love me? Is still circling, circling, circling.
Yeah.
And so the big gesture doesn't do a thing
Mm-mm.
to stop that circling. It's helpful for maybe a moment, but depending on how difficult the relationship has gotten,
Mhm.
what you said is actually a really good way of putting it, which is she may not trust it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's how I felt for sure.
Yeah.
And okay, so I had a really great question. Where did it go? Well, maybe it'll come back to me. Okay, so when a
It'll hit
woman,
you at 3 o'clock in the morning.
I know, right? Be like,
You're going to
oh
sit
man,
up
that's
and
what I
go,
wanted to
oh, that's
ask
what it's
her.
about.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay, so I feel like for the men that are listening, and maybe even for the women who want to help their men, the next question is, well, how do I help him understand the little things? Because when our brains are not wired the same,
Right.
it you really have to follow like a checklist to
Yeah.
program your brain to think like that, right?
Yeah.
And so I feel like the men naturally will be like, okay, what are the, so for me, like the listening, for me listening is one thing, but for at first he would listen while he was looking at his phone, and I'm like,
Right.
you're not listening to me.
That's
give
not
me
listening.
give me your eyes. And then I found out, tell me, I don't know if this surfaced in your research or not, but I found out that the eye contact with for a woman releases the same chemical in the brain that men have when they have sex.
Yes,
It's the same
that's
chemical
correct.
release. Oh my goodness,
It's
that's just
not so
crazy.
much just about the eye contact. Let me correct a little something.
Sure.
My understanding of this, and again, the neuroscience is complicated enough that I never want to sound like the expert, right? But from what I can tell in the research, um, basically, it's not just the eye contact, it's the deep conversation.
Mm.
And so you're present,
Mhm.
you've got some of it doesn't have to be eye contact. You can have that deep conversation. But if he's looking at his phone, you're not feeling deep conversation,
No,
right?
yeah.
So it's more the attention
Mhm.
that's the issue, and the attention can be had without the eye contact. And the reason, by the way, that that's important to know is that sometimes we sabotage what we most want when we insist on eye contact. Long story, but eye contact with men is highly likely to stimulate a flight or fight response.
Yeah, because it's taken like a challenge, right?
It takes a normal interaction and turns it into I've got my eye on you. right? Like it turns it into a predator and prey kind of thing. And so either they kind of bow up and like they're ready for a fight and they're anticipating criticism. So a totally normal conversation is heard as criticism. And the only reason was that you were looking in his eyes. I know
Huh.
that sounds really funny, but that it either is that or withdrawal, flight, because I
Right.
can't, my brain just got completely hung up by this and I've got to step away. I can't process this. And
Huh.
so what we often find is that side by side talking, like you guys are making dinner together, or you're driving the car,
Yeah.
or you're walking in the neighborhood, or you're talking, but you're not staring into each other's eyes. That sometimes with some men, that can actually be more productive. And by the way, it works the same way with boys, with our sons.
I was gonna say, so I often, when I'm disciplining the boys, shoot, I'm making it worse because I always tell them, look at my eyes, look at me
Yeah,
when I'm talking to you. Because to me, it feels so disrespectful if they're not looking at me when I'm saying something
I
important.
know.
And so, but they, especially the more intense that I get, the more they want to look away.
Yes.
And so, okay, so I'm
The
making that worse.
reason, the reason that they're, and I'll actually, here's the problem. I'm going to tell you what is probably going on, but there's a small chance that it's the opposite,
Okay.
obviously, because everybody's an individual.
Uh-huh.
But here's what is probably happening statistically, most likely happening,
Uh-huh.
is that the more intense you get, the more their brain wants to either fight or shut off,
Uh-huh.
okay, fight or flight. And so they're actually looking away in order to keep their brain engaged. And so it's the opposite of what you think. It's trying to be respectful, it's
Makes sense.
trying to listen
Hmm.
in most cases. Now, are there people for whom they just don't give a rip and they're looking away because they don't care? Of course, that's going to happen occasionally too. But in most cases, it's actually an attempt to learn and to listen because they
Okay.
don't want their brain to shut down. They want to hear what the issue is so that they can fix
Interesting.
it,
I feel
right?
like you just saved my kids' lives. So, okay, but so back to the women thing though, this is something I wanted to point out. So, when it comes to learning all the little ways to make her feel secure,
Yes.
I did have a guest on my show a few years ago, Heath Stoner. It was around Valentine's Day, and he's a romance coach. And he had a really great tip for the guys in that he would tell them to go to their wife and say, write down 30 ways, small or big, that I make you feel loved,
Yep.
and then to take that list and put it in his calendar. So every day he
Yep.
does one of those little things. Do you have any other little tips or ways that guys can learn those little things?
What I'll tell the men is that that's the reason that we did in the research, we tried to identify the top 5 so that no matter what, yes, do the 30 things, but don't put the pressure on yourself to do one a day.
Right,
Right?
right.
Like what's day number 4? What's day number 17? And instead, yes, find out what those things are because your wife is going to be different in some ways. Find out what some of those things are. What are the things that either A, come naturally to you that you can do easily, or B, that you can do even if it doesn't come naturally, but that you can kind of build kind of repetition in your brain and it becomes more of a habit.
Yeah.
And so we identified the top 5
Okay.
for women
All the men,
because
get out your notebooks and pens
yeah,
because
seriously. So and some of these I already mentioned. So 82% of women said if he takes her hand, like you're sitting at the movies or at church or whatever, you take her hand, or walking through a parking lot or whatever. Number 2 is sending her some sort of a little message during the day, like that text message example. It could be an email, could be an old fashioned voice note, whatever it is, but some sort of a little message during the day, and this really, really matters for 75% of women. Some sort of physical, affectionate gesture, like putting his arm around her, putting his hand on her knee, etc., including, by the way, in public.
yeah.
So having that kind of, his arm resting around her at dinner is like a public, it's not a huge PDA, but it's a public signal, you're mine,
Mhm.
and I'm happy about
Yeah.
that. Okay.
Yeah.
Number 4, which we didn't talk about yet, is telling her sincerely how beautiful she is to
Yes.
him.
And
That's a big deal.
not in a way that's like has sexual undertones, but
Right.
just purely
Just
simply not like,
exactly.
woo woo, you look good today.
Yeah,
Okay.
what's happening later, baby? Yeah,
Right,
no.
exactly.
This is one of the ones that this really, really deeply pleases 76% of women. And I think um, the number that found it nice was almost 100%. This was
Oh
a
wow.
really big one. This is an example of one of the ones that probably doesn't come naturally to men, even though they think it, they don't say it.
Mm-hmm.
And so this is an example of, but if you practice this, suddenly you're going to see opportunities for this.
Mm-hmm.
For example, when she comes downstairs dressed for church and says, "How do I look?"
Mm-hmm.
The standard response is, "You look great. Let's go." Right?
Mm-hmm.
As opposed to take an extra 10 seconds and say, "Wow, you look great."
Yeah.
And that's the equivalent of,
Mm.
"You're beautiful to me." Like
Yeah.
those little things, like Jeff did this not long ago where he looked sideways at me. We were driving in the car or something. And he was like, "You are really such a beautiful woman." And I can't remember
Oh.
exactly what he said, but it was like this little, like, it wasn't related to anything we were doing. It just, he has tried to
Mm.
train himself that when he's thinking it, it makes it out of his mouth.
Yeah.
And that's a neural thing that you just have to practice and you'll get
So,
there.
okay, question. I'm going to
Yeah.
interject right there.
Yeah.
If now men, I want the men to hear this. If the only time you think to say it out loud is when she's naked or getting naked, it doesn't count
It
anymore.
doesn't count. No, it doesn't. It still may be great. Like she may be insecure about her body and like that may actually be a deep reassurance for her, but it's in a different category.
Yeah. It feels more like, for me anyways, it feels like a means to an end. And so
Yes.
I don't trust it the same. I'm
Yes.
like, okay, I know where you're headed.
Yeah, just be aware that she's discounting anything that could conceivably be related to you want to get lucky later.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead. Number
Yeah.
5.
Number 5 is that he pulls himself out of a funk when he's moody.
Yeah, that's helpful, but I didn't think that would be on the list.
Yep. This is another big one. This is
Mm-hmm.
again 3 out of 4 women. Um, this one is important to understand and guys don't realize when they have a bad day at work or whatever. It may not be that there's any reason. They're just in a bad mood.
Mm-hmm.
For whatever reason. The way that I put it is like it's like you've got the black cloud of doom following you around,
Yes.
right? And it naturally tends to trigger what's wrong
Mm-hmm.
with us,
Mm-hmm.
right? Are you mad at me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what did I do? Like, it tends to have a triggering effect without the woman realizing it on her insecurity.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if a man, sorry, if a man will practice pulling himself out of a funk, pulling himself out of that bad mood, and there's all sorts of different ways to do that. We all know those things, like even turning your mind towards things you can praise, Philippians 4:8. Think
Yeah.
on the things that are excellent and lovely and worthy of praise rather than what's driving you nuts.
Yeah.
When you do that, you don't realize as a man at this moment, you have to just trust me on this because we saw it on the survey.
Mm-hmm.
But for 3 out of 4 women, that is life giving.
Mm-hmm.
Men think if they're in a bad mood, it only impacts them.
Mm-mm.
They don't realize that it impacts everybody else in the house.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the case whether you're a teenage boy or 50-year-old man, right? It doesn't matter. And so that one coming out on the survey, that was originally a pretty big surprise for us when we saw
Yeah.
that come out in the
That
data.
that
And
makes
now it's
sense.
like, now whenever I say it, women are like, yes.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, because the truth be told, if my husband's gonna come home in a funk like that and not deal with it, I would rather him not come home.
I know.
Like, stay at
Yeah.
work, sleep at work if you have to, come home happy.
Yeah, and it's hard because men deserve a place to let their hair down too,
Yeah.
and letting their hair down as well may mean being able to be authentic and genuine about what's going on
Yes.
with them, and that they're having a really hard day.
Yeah.
And that's fine. The problem comes, just like it's fine with if any of these issues that we've been talking about happen in isolation.
Uh-huh.
The problem comes when that's a pattern.
Mm-hmm.
And so for most men, in most cases, most of the time, it isn't a big, huge deal that they can't like get out of that day. Most of the time, they're just not in a great mood. And it's like, you know what? This isn't good for me. This isn't good for my family. Let me adjust my attitude and, be present with a smile.
Yeah.
Um, and, if there's something going on at work, I can click the X in my brain and I will pick that up tomorrow.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I feel like for what we learned about how men's brains work, it should be easier. And I don't mean this in an uncompassionate, empathetic way,
Yeah.
but it sounds like it would be easier for them to deal with a bad mood than for a woman, because for them, they can shift into another box. Whereas for a woman, everything's
Yeah.
layered and that
It,
mental load is a thing.
it depends on the box. The way that we describe it to, like, if we, when Jeff and I are doing a marriage event, here's the way that we describe this. And it helps everybody kind of get what we're talking about. Put it in terms that the husband can understand what this feels like. So if let's just say that let's just say if it's a man listening to this, that you work in I'm going to make this up, you work in a consulting company and it's been a bad week, because your company has just lost its biggest client and it was an account you worked on. And at 5 o'clock on Friday, your boss comes by your cube and says, I'm going to need to talk to you first thing in my office on Monday morning. Have a good weekend.
Dread.
Like, we ask the men, how's your weekend?
Yeah.
Can you just click the X?
No.
No, because it's on something that really emotionally hits them. So again, remember us talking about financial provision and how hard it was for men to believe that women would take the financial hardship if they had to? It's because for men, the fear and the insecurity about am I able is often tied to finances.
Yeah.
Okay, it's getting more complicated, but that's the bottom line, is that am I going to be able to provide for my family is a huge, huge deal for them. So that's big enough that window is popping up all weekend. And we always tell the guys, if your wife says, just don't think about it, like, how
She
helpful is
learned it
that?
from you.
How helpful is that? And they're like, oh, okay, I get it. Like, that doesn't work. But what we tell, so that's an example of why they can't just always click the X. It's something that is emotionally big to
Really
them.
deep. Mm-hmm.
But back to the topic that we're talking about, to help the men understand the women, also think about what would happen if 5 minutes after your boss left your cube and you're now in turmoil, right? Imagine he comes back and says, you know what? I think I gave you the wrong impression. Yeah, it's been a rough week, but the reason I want to talk to you on Monday is because we're bringing in a new client and I want you to work on that account and I wanted to talk about it.
So different.
And here's what has just happened. He's just been reassured about his insecurity. Mm-hmm. And how grateful is he to his boss for coming back and saying that? Mm-hmm. That is the same gratitude your wife feels towards you if you're a husband and you've had a little bit of a tiff before you drive away for work. Mm-hmm. If you say, look, I don't want to give you the wrong impression, we're okay.
Yeah.
That's the same gratitude your wife feels towards you.
That's so good. That's a perfect parallel. Okay, so I want to hit one last topic because it's a spicy one, and it's the one that men probably will really want to learn about. And I know you're so gracious. Can I still take 10 more minutes of
Of
your time?
course. Yes,
Okay.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
So what did your research find that men don't tend to understand about their wives in regard to sex? Because I think we all know men and women operate very differently.
I know 24% of women are the higher desire spouse,
Okay.
which is a pretty big number.
Yeah, I mean it's a quarter of
Actually.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I can't remember what the numbers are in terms of the percentage of women that wanted sex pretty frequently. Anyway, but in answer to your question about what men need to understand about their wives, there's one big picture issue that everybody needs to know first. And this actually really helps a lot of men kind of understand where to put this category. So it turns out that under the surface, all of us, men and women, by the way, all of us think that if one person wants more than what's happening, which is the case for 79% of couples, by the way, which is a lot,
Yeah.
everybody assumes that it's because one person has a lower sex drive than the other. That's just the category. We just assume that that means, and usually it's the wife, not always, but usually. And so we just assume that means that she has a lower libido. And so suddenly you're in this kind of fight constantly of one, the husband wanting more and the wife being like, please leave me alone. Like twice a week is fine or whatever. It turns out that that could be the case, but that is not usually the main issue. And that if you understand the main issue, you both are likely to connect more often. So and there are many different things that could be going on, but this is a big one. It turns out it's usually not just the level of desire that's the issue. It turns out there's two types of desire. So, and this is what most people don't know, but the numbers were astounding on this. And by the way, I wrote this book into this research with this eminent Christian sex therapist because this is such a technical field.
Yeah.
So this is all very accurate physiologically. It turns out that there are almost between the two different types of desires, there's almost an opposite physiological response. So you have one type of desire that you could call initiating desire or assertive desire. And it's what you see in Hollywood, right? It's the guy and the girl look at each other across the room and there's a spark, there's hunger, right? You feel a desire and you move towards it. It turns out that that is only 10% of couples.
What?
Yeah, only 10% of couples. What that means is both the wife and the husband have that initiating desire, have that sense of, I have a desire to pursue sex and I do something about it. The vast majority don't follow that pattern. And the reason is that there's a second type of desire. This is called receptive desire. And receptive desire works physiologically in the reverse order. Someone with receptive desire does not feel sexual desire at first, usually. And instead, they decide to get engaged with their spouse. So their spouse makes a move and they're like, okay, now I have to start thinking about this. I wasn't thinking about it before, because if you were thinking about it before, you have initiating desire. Okay.
Got it.
So the person with receptive desire, they decide to get engaged. And then as they do, and as their physiology starts getting stimulated, then the sense of desire starts arising that maybe their partner felt 10 minutes ago.
Gotcha.
Okay. So, and that could be sometimes the receptive desire is the husband, or both people have receptive desire. That's a much more common thing than both people have initiating desire. And it's strongly in women, it's 73% of women have receptive desire. In men, it is strongly related to age. As a man gets older, they are more and more and more likely to switch from initiating desire to receptive desire.
Interesting.
And here's what we tell the men. If your wife is one of the 73%, or if you're a wife listening to this and you're the one with initiating desire and your husband has receptive desire, the person with receptive desire has to be approached differently. They need to know what you've got on your menu for the evening before you get to the bedroom. And so what we always say is literally give them anticipation time. That's the tool there, is that's what you need to have in your toolbox. This is not just what you've heard, because most men have heard help her with the chores, help her with the kids. You know, she's been chasing kids around all day. Help her. Yeah, okay, that's helpful. But just because you're scrubbing the toilets or chasing the kids around, is she thinking about sex? No. If she has receptive desire, no. It's just literally not occurring to her. And so you need to do something that gives her that sense of anticipation. And you flirt with her. You make some little comment like, you look kind of cute over there. Like we talked about, don't do that as part of the, hey, you're so beautiful thing. But if you do that as part of the, here's what I'd love to have happen later tonight, she can start anticipating it and start thinking about it, because she's just not thinking about it. Or he, if it's a man with receptive desire. And so the issue for men, or the woman, if she's the one with initiating desire, to think about, what can I do that works for my spouse to give anticipation time? So at some time that is neutral, you're having coffee in the morning, sometime when sex is not an option and it's not going to be a sexual conversation, just ask her. Right? Just ask, what are those things that I do that I could do to like wake your brain up to that in the morning over breakfast, so that you have an idea of, hey, it's been a week and a half and I'd love to, connect, or whatever it is.
Yeah.
That's an example of a little shift that, if this two different types of desires thing has been an issue for you guys, which it is for most couples, if you're in that category, this one little thing is sometimes an enormous difference. Now, by the way, I should mention there is a third category, a third type of desire. It's a very small percentage, but there are a small number of people who have what you might call resistant desire. And that's usually tied to some issue that they're kind of psychologically protecting themselves, or there's sexual pain, or the relationship is not in a safe place, or whatever. That's something different than what we're talking about here. But if that is the issue, it does have to be addressed in order to release, okay, that person is actually naturally initiating or naturally receptive, but right now it's kind of being masked, stifled by something else.
Yeah. Wow, that is so insightful. I've literally never heard that concept before.
I hadn't either when we first started it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, okay, so I don't want to keep you for your whole day, but I'm so grateful you gave me so much of it. So why don't you let the listeners know, and maybe let us know your other book projects you've talked about.
Sure.
How can they find your stuff?
Sure, absolutely. The easiest way to, as a central place, is just to go to shaunti.com, SHAUNTI.com, because that's the easiest way to find the different projects that we're talking about. The book that I was just talking about, the newest one, is called Secrets of Sex and Marriage. We're very excited about that one, because it is the first survey of its kind, the largest survey, matched pair survey, where you're surveying anonymously both the husband and the wife. It's the largest survey that's ever been done. That's a nationally representative matched pair survey before. So we're very excited about it. And the other book that we talked about, where I was talking about like the 5 little things that mattered, that's actually from a completely different project, which is, it's a study that we did to find out what are the secrets of the happiest marriages. And it turns out that whole thing about what are the little things that you can do for your wife or your husband, I wasn't intending to, but that came out in the data. And so we put that in there. But the main book that we were talking about is for men only.
Okay, perfect.
That's what we're talking about here.
Perfect. I love it. And the other one was for women only. So like when we bought these books originally, which for men only, my husband had it. I don't know what he did with it. Maybe it's at his church office or something, but we bought it as the pair because I was like,
Yeah,
I wanted to read both because I was
you
like,
should.
reading about the women will probably help me, like you said, have language for things I have felt but not been able to articulate. And so I encourage you guys to buy them in the pair if you're going to buy them. But otherwise, go check out Shaunti.com. And I plan to look into that. And you do marriage conferences as well for anyone who's listening who may be looking for someone to come to a marriage conference at their church, right?
Oh,
Yes.
thanks, Jen, for mentioning that. Yes.
Okay. Well, that's amazing. Well, Shaunti, thanks so much for coming on here again. So as before, I feel like my brain was filled and I'm
Oh, I'm
inspired and
glad.
I'm given some more tools for helping me with all the men in my life.
I'm glad.
So, well, you guys, thanks so much for listening and happy Valentine's week-ish. This come out around Valentine's Day. So I hope you guys had a wonderful Valentine's Day. Make sure to hit subscribe if you have not subscribed to Java with Jen podcast. You don't want to miss the incredible guests that I've been having on my show, such as Shaunti. And you guys share this with a friend. If this blessed you, share it with a couple of girlfriends or a couple of guy friends that need the data that we shared in today's episode. And we will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Thanks so much for tuning in to today's show. Listen, let's stay connected. Come follow me on Instagram at Java with Jen, where you can follow the latest and say hey. It's a really great way to stay in touch. Many of you have also asked how you can support the show. You can make donations through the Anchor app or on Patreon, or of course by sharing, rating, and reviewing on social media and iTunes as well. Your heartfelt feedback always reminds me why I do this. Also, don't miss our merch store where you can get super cool Java with Jen swag and coffee. Find it at javawithjenmerch.com. Until next time, remember, hearing God's voice is simple, and He wants to be a part of your everyday life. See you next week.